Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's been years since my college days. I was a sophomore majoring in theater tech at a mid-sized state university in the Midwest. Our department was putting on a production of Tennessee Williams's Asterisk, a streetcar named Desire Asterisk. And I'd landed a gig as a lighting tech and general stagehand. It was grueling work. Long hours in a dimly lit auditorium that smelled like old wood, paint, and that faint, musty odor theaters always seem to have. But I loved it. There was something thrilling about bringing a story to life from behind the scenes. The incident happened about midway through the run, maybe 3 weeks into performances. We'd had a particularly rough show that night. Missed cues, a prop malfunction during the poker scene, and the lead actress had twisted her ankle slightly during the big confrontation. By the time the audience cleared out, it was well past midnight, and the director called for a late-night tech rehearsal to iron out the kinks. There were only a handful of us left. Me, the sound guy named Mike, our stage manager Lisa, and a couple of other crew members tweaking the set. I was up on the lighting grid, adjusting some gels and running through the cue sequence for the final scene. The catwalks, those narrow metal walkways suspended high above the stage, were my domain that night. It's an eerie place up there. All shadows and creaking underfoot, with the stage lights casting long, distorted beams through the rigging. As I was fiddling with a spotlight, I glanced across the fly loft, the area where we store scenery and fly it in and out during the show. Something caught my eye. A silhouette, crouched low behind a bundle of ropes and pulleys. It looked like a person, a guy maybe, just sitting there motionless, his outline barely visible in the dim glow from the work lights below. At first, I figured it was one of the fly crew, maybe taking a break or checking something. We had a few night owls on the team who liked to linger after hours. "Hey, who's up there?" I called out, my voice echoing a bit in the empty space. No response. I shone my flashlight over, but the beam didn't quite reach, and the figure didn't move. A little unsettled, I called again, louder this time. "Mike, that you? We're wrapping up soon." Still nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Curiosity got the better of me, so I clipped my tools to my belt and started climbing the access ladder to the far side of the catwalk. It was a rickety thing, bolted to the wall, and every step made a metallic clang that seemed way too loud in the quiet theater. By the time I reached the top and crossed over, my heart was pounding. I swept my flashlight around the corner where I'd seen the shape, and there was nothing. Just dusty ropes, some forgotten sandbags, and the usual clutter. No one. I even checked the adjacent platforms, thinking maybe they'd ducked away, but the place was empty. I chalked it up to fatigue and shadows playing tricks. Late nights do that to you. And climbed back down, feeling a bit foolish. The rest of the week passed without incident. The show wrapped up successfully, and we moved into strike. The process of dismantling the set, striking the lights, and packing everything away. It was another all-nighter, with the whole crew pitching in, fueled by pizza and energy drinks. I was assigned to clear out the fly loft, hauling down scenery flats and coiling ropes. As I was shoving aside a pile of old backdrops in a rarely used corner, a dark nook tucked behind the main rigging, I spotted something out of place. There, wedged between the beams and the wall, was a tattered blue sleeping bag, rolled up but clearly used. Next to it were a bunch of crumpled food wrappers, mostly from fast food joints like McDonald's and Subway, empty water bottles, and a small pile of cigarette butts, some still with filters intact. My stomach dropped. I called over Lisa and a couple others, and we pulled it all out. It wasn't just junk. It looked like someone had set up a makeshift camp. There were even a few personal items. A worn paperback book, asterisk on the road, asterisk by Kerouac, fittingly, a half-empty pack of Marlboros, and a cheap flashlight with dead batteries. No one on the crew recognized any of it, and we hadn't noticed anything missing or tampered with during the run. But the implications hit us hard. Someone had been squatting up there, right above us, for who knows how long. We reported it to campus security right away. They came down, took photos, bagged the stuff as evidence, and reviewed the theater's surveillance footage. The cameras covered the main entrances, lobby, and backstage doors, but nothing up in the catwalks themselves. They went through hours of tape from the past couple of weeks, but there was no sign of anyone unauthorized entering or leaving. No forced locks, no alarms tripped. It was like the person had materialized out of thin air. The police got involved briefly, treating it as a possible trespassing case. After some digging, they pieced together what likely happened. Turns out, the theater shared a ventilation system with an adjacent dorm building that had been under renovation. Workers had left an access panel unsecured in the attic space, which connected indirectly to our fly loft through a maintenance crawl space. A homeless guy in his 30s, who'd been spotted around campus panhandling a few times, confessed when the cops questioned locals. He'd snuck in through the dorm side during the chaos of construction, found the quiet spot up high, and used it as a shelter for about 2 weeks, coming down only at odd hours when the building was empty to scavenge food from dumpsters or use public restrooms. He timed it around our rehearsal schedule, which he'd overheard from outside, and avoided the cameras by sticking to blind spots. He wasn't dangerous, just down on his luck after losing his job. And he hadn't stolen anything or interfered with the production. The university pressed minor charges for trespassing, but it was more of a formality. They connected him with social services for housing assistance. We beefed up security after that, locked down access points, added motion sensors in the catwalks, and the theater department even held a safety workshop for future crews. Looking back, it still gives me chills to think about those nights. Working under the gaze of an invisible observer, completely unaware. But knowing the full story now, it's less about horror and more about the hidden struggles people face. It made me appreciate the safety nets we often take for granted. And it definitely taught me to double-check the shadows in any theater I work in. When I was 17, back in the summer of my junior year in high school, I decided to volunteer for a local children's theater program. It was one of those community initiatives held at the old Civic Center downtown. A creaky building with worn wooden floors, dim backstage areas, and a main stage that smelled faintly of dust and old paint. The program ran for about 6 weeks, putting on a kid-friendly production of Peter Pan, and I was excited to help out. I wasn't much of an actor, but I loved the behind-the-scenes stuff. Painting sets, organizing props, and wrangling the little kids during rehearsals. There were about a dozen of us volunteers, mostly high schoolers like me, plus a handful of adult staff members who oversaw everything. things started off normally enough. We'd show up in the mornings, rehearse lines and blocking with the kids, break for lunch, and then dive into tech work in the afternoons. But around the second week, a couple of the girls in our group, let's call them Sarah and Mia, mentioned that their bags seemed out of place. Sarah's backpack, which she'd left in the green room, that's what we called the cluttered lounge area backstage, had its zipper partially open when she came back from a rehearsal, even though she swore she'd closed it tight. Mia found her tote bag shifted a few feet from where she'd set it down, with some of her snacks rummaged through. We all laughed it off at first, blaming it on the chaotic energy of the kids running around, or maybe one of us accidentally bumping into things. But it happened a few more times, and it started to feel deliberate. Items weren't stolen, just moved, like someone was poking around curiously. Then, one afternoon after a particularly grueling rehearsal where we'd been practicing the flying scenes, which involved a lot of harnesses and pretend soaring, Sarah let out a gasp while unpacking her makeup case in the green room. Tucked neatly between her compact mirror and lipstick was a small folded piece of notebook paper. She unfolded it hesitantly, and her face went pale. "You look so beautiful in rehearsal today," it read in neat, blocky handwriting. No signature, no nothing else. We all crowded around her, a mix of curiosity and unease bubbling up. Who could have written that? Was it a joke from one of the guys in the group? But the boys denied it emphatically, and it didn't seem like their style. They were more into video games and silly impressions than creepy notes. We reported it to the staff right away. Miss Thompson, the program director, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with a clipboard always in hand, took it seriously but tried to downplay it to keep us calm. She suggested it might be a secret admirer among the volunteers or even one of the older kids trying to be funny. We did a quick sweep of the building, checking the side doors that led to the alley. They were supposed to be locked, but sometimes got propped open for ventilation, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Rehearsals continued, but there was a subtle shift in the air. Girls started keeping their bags closer, and we paired up when going to the bathroom or fetching props from storage. The following week, things escalated. It was during a dress rehearsal, and Mia had left her backpack slung over a chair in the wings while she helped adjust costumes on stage. When she returned, she noticed the front pocket unzipped. Inside, another folded note. "I'll be waiting backstage." This one sent chills down our spines. It wasn't just complimentary anymore. It felt vaguely threatening, like an invitation to something sinister. Mia burst into tears, and the whole group freaked out. Whispers flew around. Who was doing this? Was it someone sneaking in from outside, maybe a homeless person or a weirdo from the neighborhood? Or worse, one of the staff? There was Mr. Jenkins, the quiet custodian who mopped the floors and fixed lights. He was always lurking around backstage. Or maybe Derek, the college-aged intern who handled sound and seemed a bit too friendly sometimes. Miss Thompson called an emergency meeting that evening. She locked all the exterior doors, had us all empty our bags to prove no one was hiding notes, and even brought in the police. 2 officers from the local precinct showed up, a stern sergeant and a younger patrolman, who took statements from Sarah, Mia, and the rest of us. They dusted the notes for fingerprints, though they warned us that on paper like that, it might not yield much. Searched the building top to bottom, including the rafters and basement storage where old props gathered dust. They found a side door that had been left unlocked accidentally, but no signs of forced entry or anyone hiding. The police treated it as potential harassment, advising us to stay in groups and report anything else immediately. They promised to patrol the area more frequently during our program hours. For the rest of that summer, the atmosphere was tense. No one wanted to be backstage alone. We'd buddy up for everything, from grabbing a water bottle to checking the prop table. Rehearsals felt overshadowed by this invisible presence, and a few parents even pulled their kids out early, citing safety concerns. I remember lying awake at night, replaying the days in my head, wondering if I'd seen anything suspicious. Was it Mr. Jenkins with his keys to every door? Or perhaps an outsider slipping in during the chaos of arrivals and departures? As the program wrapped up with our final performances, crowded with proud parents and flashing cameras, the incident stopped as suddenly as they'd started. No more notes, no more tampered bags. The police followed up a couple of weeks later with some news that brought a mix of relief and embarrassment. Fingerprints on the second note matched those of a 15-year-old boy who was part of the cast, one of the older kids playing a lost boy. Turns out, he had a massive crush on both Sarah and Mia and thought the notes were a romantic way to get their attention, inspired by some dumb teen movie he'd watched. He'd been sneaking peeks at their stuff out of curiosity, too shy to talk to them directly. The rummaging was just him being nosy, not malicious. His parents were mortified when the cops showed up at their door. He got grounded for the rest of the summer and had to apologize profusely to everyone involved. In the end, it was just a misguided kid with poor judgment, not some shadowy stalker. The program ended on a high note with the show going off without a hitch, and we all parted ways with hugs and promises to stay in touch. Looking back now, as an adult, I chuckle a bit at how terrified we were. Teenage drama amplified by our imaginations. But it taught me a lesson about vigilance and not jumping to the worst conclusions. I still volunteer at community events sometimes, but I always double-check the locks on those side doors. I remember that day like it was yesterday, even though it's been over a decade since it happened during my junior year at Lincoln High. I was part of the theater crew for our school's production of Romeo and Juliet. Not one of the stars on stage, but the guy behind the scenes handling the tech stuff. I loved it, honestly. There's something satisfying about pulling off those seamless scene changes, making the audience believe in the magic without them ever seeing the sweat and chaos backstage. Our tech director, Mr. Harlan, was this grizzled veteran who'd been running the department for 20 years. He was strict about safety, always drilling into us that theater could be dangerous if you didn't respect the equipment. The fly system was the heart of our set design. For those who aren't theater nerds, it's basically a series of pulleys, ropes, and counterweights that let you fly in backdrops, curtains, and props from above the stage. Ours was an old-school arbor system, with sandbags as weights attached to metal frames, all connected by thick hemp ropes. We'd been rehearsing for weeks, and everything had been going smoothly. Just 2 days before the incident, the school had brought in a professional inspector from the district to check the rigging. He went over every knot, every pulley, every rope with a fine-tooth comb, gave it a clean bill of health. No fraying, no weak spots, nothing. Mr. Harlan even joked about framing the inspection report. It was a Thursday afternoon, right in the middle of a full dress rehearsal. We were running Act 3, the big Capulet party scene, with the stage bustling with actors in their Renaissance costumes. I was up in the fly loft, manning the ropes with a couple of other crew members, Sarah and Mike. The backdrop for that scene was this massive painted canvas of a grand ballroom, weighing a ton with all the framing. It was suspended about 20 feet up, ready to drop into place on cue. We hit the cue, and I started lowering it slowly, hand over hand on the rope. That's when it happened. There was this sharp, whipping crack, like a gunshot mixed with a thunderclap, and the rope just gave way. The arbor plummeted, and the backdrop came crashing down way too fast. I yelled something incoherent, grabbing at the slack line, but it was useless. On stage, 2 actors, our Romeo, this kid named Alex, and a background dancer, Lisa, were right in the drop zone. The edge of the backdrop missed them by inches, slamming into the stage floor with a boom that shook the whole auditorium. Splinters flew everywhere, and the dust from the impact made everyone cough. Alex dove out of the way just in time, scraping his knee bad enough to need stitches later. And Lisa twisted her ankle, dodging it. If they'd been a step closer, it could have been catastrophic. Broken bones, concussions, or worse. The rehearsal ground to a halt. Kids were screaming. Mr. Harlan came running from the booth, and our director, Miss Patel, was on stage in seconds, checking on everyone. I felt sick to my stomach, replaying the moment in my head. Had I messed up the knot? Was the weight off? But no. I double-checked everything that morning, just like always. The paramedics showed up, school policy for any accident, and cleared the injured actors, but the mood was shattered. Rehearsal was canceled, and we all went home shaken, whispering about what could have caused it. The next day, Mr. Harlan called an emergency meeting for the tech crew and a few faculty advisors. The principal was there too, looking grim. They hauled the broken rope down for inspection. It wasn't frayed at all. The fibers looked pristine, like it had just come off the spool. But when they examined the knot at the arbor, the big, secure hitch that held the whole thing together, it was loose. Not just a little slack. It had been untied partially, enough that the tension from lowering the drop had unraveled it completely. Mr. Harlan swore up and down that he'd personally tied and checked that knot after the inspection. And no one had access to the fly loft overnight except for the crew. Word spread like wildfire through the school. Was it sabotage? A prank? We had our share of drama in the theater department. Rivalries over roles, grudges from past shows. But nothing that seemed malicious enough for this. The principal launched a quiet investigation, interviewing everyone involved. They checked the security cameras in the auditorium, but the angles didn't cover the loft directly. A couple of kids pointed fingers. There was this senior, Jake, who'd been passed over for a lead role and had been grumbling about the production. He'd been seen lingering backstage more than usual. And then there was Emily, a former crew member who'd quit after a fight with Mr. Harlan over safety protocols. She knew the system inside out. It took about a week, but the truth came out in a way that was almost anticlimactic. Jake confessed during a one-on-one with the counselor. It wasn't some grand scheme to wreck the show. He'd loosened the knot as a stupid, impulsive joke to scare the actors a bit, thinking it'd just cause a minor delay or a funny mishap. He didn't realize how dangerous it could be. He was pissed about not getting cast and wanted to vent. Turns out, he'd snuck up there during lunch the day before when the loft was unattended. No one else was involved. The school handled it firmly, but fairly. Jake got suspended for 2 weeks, had to do community service, and was banned from all extracurriculars for the rest of the year. He also had to apologize to the whole cast and crew in a meeting that was awkward as hell. Alex and Lisa recovered fine, no lasting injuries. And the show went on after we replaced the rope and had another inspection. Mr. Harlan implemented new rules, double locking mechanisms on the knots, buddy checks for all rigging, and limited access to the loft. It made us all more vigilant, and honestly, it bonded the group. We pulled off a killer performance in the end, with standing ovations every night. Looking back, it could have been so much worse, but it taught me a hard lesson about trust and responsibility in theater, or anywhere, really. People do dumb things when they're angry or overlooked, but owning up to it and fixing the damage is what matters. I still get a little twitchy around fly systems, though. I remember the old Regal Theater like it was yesterday. The creaky wooden floors, the faded velvet curtains that smelled like dust and old perfume, and the constant hum of activity backstage. I worked there as a lighting technician for about 5 years in the early 2000s, handling spotlights and rigging for everything from community plays to touring musicals. It was a historic place, built back in the 1920s, with all sorts of nooks and crannies that whispered stories from vaudeville days. But the one story that stuck with me wasn't from those golden eras. It was something more recent and oddly mundane once we pieced it together. It all came out during a big renovation project in the summer of 1998. I wasn't there yet, but I heard about it from the old-timers when I started. The theater had been struggling financially, and the city finally coughed up some grant money to modernize the place. That meant tearing up parts of the stage to update the wiring and reinforce the supports. A crew of contractors was down there one afternoon, prying up floorboards that hadn't seen the light of day since who knows when. They hit something solid. A heavy trapdoor, bolted shut and covered in layers of grime and paint from decades of shows. It wasn't on any of the blueprints, which was the first red flag. But theaters like that are full of forgotten features from old productions. Curiosity got the better of them, so they called in the theater manager, an old guy named Harold who'd been around since the 60s. He figured it might be an old storage pit or a remnant from the building's vaudeville roots, where they dropped scenery or performers through the floor for dramatic effects. They pried it open with crowbars, and a musty, stale air rushed out, like opening a time capsule. What they found inside wasn't props or forgotten costumes, though. It was a small, cramped space, maybe 8 feet by 10, with a low ceiling reinforced by wooden beams. Scattered around were personal items that looked like they'd been abandoned in a hurry. A threadbare wool coat, patched at the elbows and stained with what might have been coffee or grease. A cheap wristwatch with a cracked face, its hands frozen at 3:47. A few rusted cans of beans and soup, labels peeling but still readable. Brands from the late 70s or early 80s. And a rolled-up sleeping bag, mildewed and flattened from years of disuse. The crew was baffled. This wasn't ancient history. The stuff was too modern to tie back to the theater's origins. No one could recall any record of someone using that space, and the trapdoor's location, right under the center stage, meant it would have been impossible to access during performances without being noticed. Or so they thought. Word spread quickly among the staff, of course. By the time the renovations wrapped up, everyone had a theory. A runaway stagehand, a squatter dodging the cold winters, even wilder ideas like a spy or a fugitive. It creeped people out. The notion that someone might have been living down there, listening to the applause and footsteps overhead, slipping in and out through some hidden entrance during off hours. Management didn't want a scandal, so Harold handled it quietly. They cleared everything out, documented it for insurance purposes, and sealed the trapdoor permanently with concrete. But a few weeks later, one of the older ushers, a woman named Evelyn who'd worked there since the 70s, came forward with a story that put it all into perspective. Turns out, back in 1982, during a rough patch when the theater was closed for months due to a fire code violation, a maintenance guy named Eddie had fallen on hard times. He was divorced, out of work, and couldn't afford rent. Evelyn remembered him as a quiet type, always tinkering backstage. He'd discovered the old trap door while doing repairs and turned it into a temporary hideout, sneaking food from the concessions and using the theater's facilities when no one was around. It wasn't some grand mystery. He'd only stayed a few weeks before getting back on his feet and moving on to a job at a warehouse downtown. He'd mentioned it to Evelyn in passing years later, over coffee, but she'd forgotten until the discovery jogged her memory. Eddie had passed away by then, in the mid-90s, from natural causes. But his family confirmed the details when Harold reached out. They even came by to collect the watch and coat as keepsakes. It turned out the son's secret access was just a loose panel in the basement wall that led to the space. Nothing sinister, just resourceful desperation. The theater moved on after that. Renovations finished, shows resumed. And the story became one of those quirky anecdotes we shared during late-night loadouts. It still gives me a chill thinking about how close we are to the hidden struggles of others, right under our feet. But in the end, it was just a reminder of the tough times people go through. The Regal's still standing, hosting plays to this day, with no more surprises lurking below the boards. It was back in the summer of 2018 when this whole weird thing happened at the little community theater where I volunteered. I'm not much of an actor, never had the nerves for the spotlight. But I loved the behind-the-scenes stuff. I'd been doing backstage work for a couple of years by then, mostly handling props, lighting cues, and helping with set changes. Our theater was this old converted warehouse on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. It had that musty smell of aged wood and faded costumes, and the dressing rooms were these cramped little spaces in the basement, each with a single door that locked from the inside or with a key from the outside. We were in the thick of rehearsals for a production of Our Town. It was a small cast, maybe a dozen actors plus the crew, and everyone knew each other pretty well, or at least that's what I thought. Rehearsals ran late most nights, wrapping up around 10 p.m., and that particular evening had been a long one. We'd been blocking the final act, and by the time the director called it quits, I was beat. I remembered tossing my jacket into the men's dressing room earlier that night. It was one of those shared spaces with lockers, mirrors, and a bunch of mismatched chairs. I hadn't bothered locking my stuff up because, honestly, who would? It was a tight-knit group, and nothing like this had ever happened before. As everyone was packing up and heading out, I realized I'd left my jacket behind. No big deal, I thought. I jogged back down the creaky stairs to the basement hallway. The door to the dressing room was closed, which was normal, but when I tried the handle, it was locked. That struck me as odd right away. Nobody locks the dressing room during rehearsals unless they're changing. And the last person out had been one of the actors, Mark, who I'd seen leaving with the group about 20 minutes earlier. I knocked a few times, called out, but no answer. Figuring maybe someone had accidentally locked it on their way out, I went upstairs to find Sarah, our stage manager. She was the organized type, always with her clipboard and a no-nonsense attitude. and she had the master set of keys for the building. "Sarah, the dressing room's locked," I said, catching her as she was turning off the lights in the lobby. "I need my jacket." She frowned, checking her key ring. "That's weird. I haven't locked it yet. Who was the last one in there?" We rounded up a couple of the lingering crew members and headed back down. Sarah slid her key into the lock. It turned smoothly, no resistance, and pushed the door open. The room looked mostly normal at first glance. Costumes hanging on racks, makeup scattered on the counters, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. But then I spotted my jacket. It wasn't on the hook where I'd left it. Instead, it was crumpled on the floor near the back wall, like it had been tossed there in a hurry. I picked it up, and that's when my stomach dropped. All the pockets were turned inside out. The inner ones, the outer ones, even the little zippered compartment on the sleeve. My wallet was still tucked in one of them, but when I flipped it open, the cash I'd had in there, about $60 from lunch earlier that day, was gone. Credit cards, Idaho, everything else was intact, but the bills were missing. "What the hell?" I muttered, showing it to Sarah and the others. We searched the room quickly, thinking maybe the money had fallen out, but no luck. The window was sealed shut. It's one of those basement ones that's painted over and doesn't open. And there were no other exits. The lock on the door was a standard deadbolt, nothing fancy, but it required a key from the outside to lock it. Sarah swore up and down that her key ring had been with her the entire night, clipped to her belt loop like always. She hadn't left it unattended, not even for a bathroom break. We asked around, and no one else had a copy. The theater only had 2 keys total, one with Sarah and a spare locked in the office safe upstairs, which hadn't been touched. By this point, we were all a bit spooked, so we decided to check the security footage. The theater had a couple of cheap cameras installed after a minor break-in a year earlier, one in the lobby and one covering the basement hallway. The hallway cam had a clear view of the dressing room door. We huddled around the monitor in the office, rewinding through the last few hours. Sure enough, the footage showed the last person leaving the room around 9:45 p.m. It was Mark, flipping off the light and pulling the door shut behind him, unlocked. After that, nothing. No one approached the door until I showed up at 10:15 p.m. and tried the handle. The hallway was empty the whole time, no shadows, no glitches in the recording. It was like the door had locked itself and some invisible hand had gone through my jacket. We reported it to the police the next day, more out of formality than anything. They came by, dusted for prints, found a bunch but nothing unusual in a shared space, and reviewed the footage themselves. The officer was as baffled as we were, but chalked it up to a possible pickpocket who knew the building well. The theater's insurance covered the stolen cash. It wasn't much, so I wasn't out anything major. But the mystery nagged at me for weeks. I started double-checking my stuff, and even brought a padlock for my locker after that. It wasn't until about a month later, during strike, the teardown after the show's run, that we figured it out. We were clearing out the dressing rooms, pulling everything off the shelves and walls, when one of the crew members, Lisa, found a small vent grate loose in the corner behind a costume rack. It led to a narrow crawl space that connected to the adjacent storage room, which was unlocked most of the time for easy access to props. The grate was old and rusted, easy to pop off without tools if you knew it was there. Turns out, the building's original layout from the warehouse days had these vents for air circulation. But they've been forgotten over the years. We pieced it together from there. Someone must have slipped into the storage room during the chaos of rehearsal wrap-up, waited until the coast was clear, then crawled through the vent into the dressing room. They'd lock the door from the inside to avoid interruptions, go through whatever was easy to grab, like my jacket, which was right near the vent, pocket the cash, and crawl back out, leaving the door locked behind them. The security cam didn't cover the storage room, so no footage of that. As for who? It turned out to be a former volunteer, a guy named Alex, who'd been let go a few months earlier for showing up unreliable. He'd hung around town and knew the building inside out, including those vents from when he'd helped with renovations. The police tracked him down based on a tip from another cast member who'd seen him lurking near the theater that night. He confessed when confronted, said he was hard up for cash and figured a quick grab from the dressing room wouldn't hurt anyone he didn't know personally. Got charged with petty theft, did some community service, and that was that. Looking back, it wasn't some ghostly intruder or impossible heist. It was just a desperate guy exploiting an old building's quirks. The theater sealed up the vent after that, upgraded the locks, and we all got a good story out of it. I still volunteer there from time to time, but now I always hang my jacket in plain sight. I remember that night like it was yesterday, even though it's been a few years now. I was working as a lighting operator at this cozy little community theater in a mid-sized town. Nothing fancy, just an old building from the 1920s with creaky wooden floors and that musty smell of history mixed with fresh paint. The place seated maybe 200 people tops, with a main floor and a small balcony up top that overlooked the stage. My booth was tucked away in the back, elevated just enough to give me a bird's eye view of everything. The actors milling about, the spotlights I controlled, and, yeah, that balcony. It was my job to cue the lights for rehearsals and shows, making sure the mood was right without blinding anyone, or leaving shadows where they shouldn't be. It was a Tuesday evening, I think, mid-rehearsal for some local production of Our Town. The cast was small, about a dozen actors, plus the director, stage manager, and a couple of tech folks like me. We were the only ones supposed to be in the building after hours. The front doors were locked and the house lights were dimmed to focus on the stage. I was up in my booth, fiddling with the board, when I glanced up at the balcony out of habit. That's when I saw him. A man, middle-aged maybe, sitting alone in the third row from the front, right in the center. He wasn't doing anything dramatic, just sitting there, arms crossed, watching the rehearsal intently. He had on a dark jacket and what looked like a baseball cap, but from my angle, I couldn't make out his face clearly. It struck me as odd because the balcony wasn't even open for this run-through. We kept it closed to save on cleaning and to keep the focus downstairs. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the crew sneaking up for a better view or a smoke break. People did that sometimes, even though it was against the rules. But no, I'd seen everyone down on stage or in the wings just minutes before. I rubbed my eyes, figuring it might be a trick of the light. I mean, I was the one controlling the damn things after all. But he was still there, unmoving. A chill ran down my spine. Not because it felt supernatural or anything, but because it just didn't add up. Who the hell was this guy? And how'd he get in? I grabbed my radio, standard issue for tech crew, and buzzed the stage manager, Sarah. "Hey Sarah, this is Mike up in lights. You got anyone up in the balcony? There's a guy sitting up there, row C, center." There was a pause. Then her voice crackled back, sounding puzzled. Negative, Mike. Balcony's locked. No one's supposed to be up there. I'll send Jake to check it out. Jake was our assistant stage manager, a burly guy in his 20s who doubled as security when needed. I watched from my booth as he headed up the stairs, flashlight in hand. The rehearsal paused for a minute while everyone whispered and glanced around. I kept my eyes glued to the balcony, but the man didn't budge. He didn't even seem to notice the commotion below. A couple of minutes later, Jake radioed back. "Sarah, Mike, balcony's empty. Doors are locked from the inside. No sign of anyone." "You sure you saw something, Mike? Maybe a shadow from the rig?" I felt my face heat up. "Positive, Jake. Guy in a dark jacket just sitting there. Check again?" He did, sweeping the rows with his light. Nothing. By then, Sarah had called a quick break, and a few of us went up to look ourselves. The balcony was dusty, seats undisturbed, no footprints or wrappers, or anything to suggest someone had been there recently. The doors were indeed locked with those old brass deadbolts, the kind that required a key from either side. We even checked the emergency exit up there. It led to a fire escape outside, but it was chained and padlocked, untouched. The rehearsal wrapped early that night. Everyone was a bit spooked, including me. I couldn't shake the image of that silent watcher. Sarah pulled the security footage from the lobby cameras. The theater had a basic setup, nothing high-tech, but it covered the main entrances and the hallway leading to the balcony stairs. We huddled in the office afterward, fast-forwarding through the tapes. No one entered the building after we locked up at 6 p.m. No one went up those stairs except Jake when I called it in. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Empty hallways, no mysterious figures slipping in or out. For the next few days, it bugged me. I started double-checking the balcony before every rehearsal, shining my work light up there just to be sure. The cast joked about it being a ghost. Our theater had those old urban legends, like every historic building does, but I wasn't buying into that. I'm a practical guy. There had to be an explanation. Sarah filed a report with the theater board, and they had a maintenance guy come in to inspect the place. That's when we found it. Turns out, there was an old access panel in the ceiling of the balcony, hidden behind some decorative molding. It led to a crawl space that connected to the attic above the main auditorium. A remnant from the building's original design, probably for wiring or ventilation back in the day. The panel wasn't locked. It just pushed up and out of the way. From there, someone could drop down into the balcony without using the doors or stairs. And get this. The attic had a separate entrance from the roof, accessible via a ladder on the side of the building that wasn't covered by our cameras. We pieced it together with the police, who we called in just to be safe. The watcher was likely a local homeless man who'd been spotted around the neighborhood. He'd probably climbed up the ladder during the day, found the attic as a warm spot to crash, and then slipped down to the balcony for a free show that night. By the time Jake got up there, the guy had heard the radio chatter or footsteps and retreated back into the crawl space, waiting it out until we left. No footage because he never used the main entrances. The police checked the attic and found some signs, a blanket, a few food wrappers that matched the timeline. We sealed up the panel, added locks to the roof access, and upgraded the cameras to cover more angles. Never saw the guy again, and honestly, I felt bad for him more than anything. It wasn't malice, just someone looking for shelter and maybe a bit of entertainment. The theater board even reached out to local shelters to see if they could help folks like him. As for me, I still glance up at that balcony during rehearsals, but now it's more out of habit than worry. Turns out, The scariest things are usually just human, with a logical explanation if you dig deep enough. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's been a couple of years now. I was the set designer for our little community theater group in that old converted warehouse on the edge of town. We'd been renting the space for about 5 years, putting on everything from local plays to kids' holiday shows. It was a quirky building. Creaky floors, drafty windows, and more locked storage rooms than we knew what to do with. Most of us were volunteers, actors, directors, tech folks like me, who built props and painted backdrops in our spare time. We weren't professionals, but we poured our hearts into it. It started innocently enough, right around the time we were prepping for our spring production of The Wizard of Oz. I was backstage one evening, sorting through our toolboxes after a long day of constructing the Emerald City set. That's when I spotted it. A rusted wrench lying on the floor near the prop storage door. It wasn't one of ours. Our tools were all neatly labeled with the theater's initials in permanent marker to prevent mix-ups. This thing looked ancient, covered in grime, and what seemed like years of neglect. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and figured maybe one of the newer volunteers had brought it from home and forgotten about it. I tossed it into our lost and found bin, a battered cardboard box we kept in the green room, and didn't think much more of it. A week later, though, another tool showed up. This time, it was an old hammer with black electrical tape wrapped around the handle, like someone had jury-rigged it to fix a loose grip. I found it propped against a stack of lumber in the main workshop, which we always locked up at night. None of us recognized it. We asked around during rehearsals. Our director, a retired school teacher named Martha, even made an announcement at the start of a read-through. Has anyone lost a hammer? It's got tape on it. Blank stares all around. We joked that maybe the building was haunted by a forgetful ghost from its warehouse days, but honestly, it was more annoying than spooky. Tools aren't cheap, and we didn't want to be accused of stealing someone else's stuff. Things got weirder as the weeks went on. The tools kept appearing in the oddest places, always in rooms that were supposed to be secured. One morning, I unlocked the costume storage, a tiny, windowless room we only accessed for fittings. And there was a brand new box cutter sitting right on the sewing table. It still had the plastic safety wrap on the blade, like it had just been bought from a hardware store. By then, the group was buzzing about it. Our lighting guy, Tom, suggested it might be remnants from the venue's past. The building had been used for construction storage before the theater took it over, and maybe some old gear was getting jostled loose during renovations elsewhere in the complex. But that didn't explain the locked doors or the newness of the box cutter. I started double-checking the locks every night before leaving, making sure everything was secure. The unease built slowly. We'd find these items at the most inconvenient times, during tech rehearsals, or when we were rushing to fix a prop mid-show. It felt invasive, like someone was toying with us. I confided in a few of the others, our stage manager, Lisa, who was always the practical one, and a couple of the actors who hung around backstage. We speculated wildly at first. Maybe a rival theater group sneaking in for sabotage, or kids from the neighborhood pulling pranks. But nothing was ever damaged or stolen. It was just these random tools materializing out of nowhere. Management, the folks who owned the building and rented it to us, weren't much help. When I called them about it, the property manager just laughed it off. Old buildings have secrets, he said. Probably just stuff left by previous tenants. Let me know if it escalates. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one unlocking doors and wondering if eyes were watching from the shadows. The final straw came during our kids' performance of Peter Pan. It was a matinee show, packed with families and squirming elementary schoolers. I was backstage, helping with quick changes and prop handoffs, when one of the young actors, a wide-eyed boy playing a lost boy, tripped over something in the wings. I rushed over, and there it was. A cordless drill, sleek and black, lying on the floor like it had been casually set down. It wasn't ours. Our inventory was meticulous, down to the last screw. The drill's battery was even partially charged, as if it had been used recently. The show went on without a hitch, thank goodness, but backstage, the mood shifted from puzzled to genuinely concerned. What if a kid had picked it up and hurt themselves? Or worse, what if this was a sign of something more serious, like unauthorized access? That night, after the audience had cleared out, a few of us decided we couldn't ignore it anymore. Lisa, Tom, and I stayed late, combing through the building with flashlights. We checked every nook, the basement storage, which we rarely used, the attic access ladder, even the ventilation grates. Nothing seemed amiss until Tom noticed a loose panel in the back wall of the prop room. It was one of those old warehouse features, a hidden maintenance crawl space that led to an unused utility area. We pried it open carefully, hearts pounding a bit, and shone our lights inside. There, tucked away on a makeshift shelf of cinder blocks, was a small stash, a sleeping bag, some canned food, a flashlight, and a few more tools scattered around. It hit us all at once. This wasn't some ghostly intruder or prankster. It was someone living rough, probably homeless, who'd found a way into the building through that forgotten access point. The tools were likely scavenged or borrowed from job sites, left behind accidentally as they moved around to avoid detection. We pieced it together. The building's exterior had a fire escape that led close to that wall. And with the theater's irregular hours, it would have been easy to slip in and out unnoticed, especially at night. We didn't call the police right away. Instead, we talked to management first thing the next morning. They were apologetic, admitting they'd overlooked securing that old crawl space during the last inspection. A maintenance crew came out that day to seal it up properly and change all the locks for good measure. We never saw the person responsible. No confrontations, no dramatic reveals. But we left a note in the space before it was boarded up, along with some info on local shelters and resources, just in case. In the end, it was a relief more than anything. What we'd built up in our minds as something sinister turned out to be a sad, human story. Someone down on their luck, using our theater as a temporary refuge. It made us more vigilant about security, and we even started a small donation drive for homeless support in the community. The tools stopped appearing after that, and our shows went on without any more uninvited guests. Looking back, it's a reminder that sometimes the scariest mysteries have the simplest explanations. I was working as a props master for this regional theater company in a mid-sized city up north. Nothing glamorous, just a converted warehouse space with creaky floors and that perpetual smell of sawdust and old paint. We'd been putting on a run of The Importance of Being Earnest, a classic comedy that required all sorts of Victorian-era knickknacks. Teacups, handbags, fake muffins, You name it. I was in charge of keeping track of everything, logging items in and out, making sure nothing got left on stage or misplaced in the chaos of rehearsals and performances. It started small, almost innocuously. One night after a show, I noticed a silver bracelet was missing from the props table. It was a cheap costume piece, nothing valuable, but it was supposed to be worn by Lady Bracknell in Act 2. I asked around. Actors, stagehands, even the director, but everyone shrugged it off. Probably rolled under a chair, someone said. We searched, but it was gone. A few days later, a walking cane vanished right before curtain call. Again, not a big deal. We had a backup, but it nagged at me. Actors can be absent-minded, sure, rushing off stage with props still in hand or leaving them in dressing rooms, but this felt off. No one admitted to borrowing it, and it didn't turn up in Lost and Found. As the weeks went on, the disappearances escalated. A pair of gloves here, a fake mustache there. Little things that could be chalked up to carelessness, but then it got weirder. Entire costumes started going missing. A velvet jacket from the wardrobe rack, a hoop skirt that took up half a shelf. These weren't items you could accidentally pocket. They were bulky, noticeable. And the real kicker? The director's keyring disappeared from his locked office. That office was off limits to most of us, with a deadbolt and everything. He kept scripts, petty cash, and personal stuff in there. When he realized it was gone, he flipped out, accused the crew of sloppiness, even hinted at theft. We all got grilled in a staff meeting, but no one knew a thing. By this point, about a month into the run, paranoia was setting in. Whispers backstage. Is it an inside job? Someone's sabotaging the show? The theater had security cameras in the lobby and over the main entrances, but nothing in the props area or backstage wings. Budget cuts, you know? We reviewed the footage anyway, but it showed zilch. No strangers lurking, no one sneaking around with armfuls of stuff. The director beefed up protocols. Sign-in sheets for props, double locks on storage, even a buddy system for closing up at night, but things kept vanishing. A prop diary, a set of antique-looking spectacles, poof. Then, during a random deep clean before striking the set for the next production, we hit pay dirt. I was with a couple of stagehands, moving old flats and sweeping out the nooks backstage. Behind this ancient radiator pipe in a forgotten corner, tucked way back where the wall met the floor, we found a massive stash. Everything was there. The bracelet, the cane, the jackets, the keyring. Even items we'd forgotten were missing, like a forgotten parasol from a previous show. It was all crammed into a dusty duffel bag, covered in cobwebs like it had been there for weeks. We called the director immediately, and security got involved, local cops even, since the keyring had some value. They dusted for fingerprints, but nothing usable turned up. Everything was smudged or clean. No DNA, no clues. The stash spot was clever. Out of sight, but accessible if you knew where to look. We figured it had to be someone on the inside. An actor, crew member, maybe even a volunteer. Motive? Who knows? Could have been a kleptomaniac, a disgruntled employee pulling a prank, or just someone hoarding for no good reason. In the end, it turned out to be one of the understudies, a guy named Alex, who'd been with the company for years, but always got passed over for bigger roles. A few days after the discovery, he came forward quietly during a follow-up meeting. Turns out, he'd been dealing with some personal stress, divorce, money troubles, and started taking things as a weird coping mechanism, like a compulsion he couldn't shake. He never meant to sell or keep them forever. It was just this escalating habit that got out of hand. He'd stash them intending to return them later. But panic set in, and he kept adding to the pile. The key ring, a momentary lapse when he was in the office dropping off notes. The director was pissed, but understanding. Alex got counseling through the company's EAP, paid restitution for any damages, and stepped away from the theater for a while. No charges were pressed. It was handled internally to avoid bad press. We all learned from it. Tightened security, better mental health check-ins for the team. The show went on, props intact, and honestly, it brought the crew closer. Theater life's full of drama, on and off stage, but sometimes it's just human frailty, not some grand mystery. I remember my internship at the old Regency Theater like it was yesterday, even though it was back in the summer of 2018. It was this charming but creaky venue in downtown Chicago, the kind of place with velvet seats that had seen better days and a backstage area that felt like a maze of dusty props and flickering lights. I was fresh out of college, majoring in theater arts, and thrilled to be there, running errands, helping with costumes, and occasionally sneaking peeks at rehearsals. The show we were putting on was a revival of Death of a Salesman, with a solid cast of local actors and a few ringers from New York. It was supposed to be a straightforward gig, but then this weird situation with the woman at the stage door started unfolding, and it turned everything upside down for a bit. It began subtly, maybe a week into previews. The stage door was this narrow alley entrance at the back of the building, where actors and crew would come and go, sometimes signing autographs for fans or meeting friends after shows. One evening, our doorkeeper, an older guy named Marty who'd been there forever, mentioned offhand that a woman had shown up asking about one of our leads. Let's call him Alex Thompson, though that's not his real name. She didn't want tickets or anything. She just wanted to know if Alex was in the cast and when he might be available to chat. Marty said she was polite, but firm, tall, maybe 5'10" or so, with a dark wool coat that seemed out of place in the humid July air, and her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She claimed she was an old friend, but wouldn't give her name or any details. Marty turned her away, figuring it was just an overzealous fan. But he noted how she lingered across the street for a while, before disappearing into the crowd. Word spread quickly among the staff. The next night, one of the stagehands reported the same thing. The woman was back. Same coat, same questions about Alex. This time, she tried to peer inside when the door opened, but security shooed her off. By the third sighting, it was becoming a running joke in the green room. Alex's mystery admirer is at it again. But Alex himself didn't find it funny. He was in his late 30s, a talented guy with a brooding intensity that suited Willie Loman perfectly, but he clammed up whenever we brought it up. "Just ignore it," he'd mutter, avoiding eye contact, and change the subject. We all assumed it was an ex-girlfriend or something from his past life. Actors have those stories, right? Divorces, old flames, the works. As the weeks went on and the show opened to decent reviews, the sightings became more frequent. She'd show up 2 or 3 times a week, always around curtain call time, asking the same questions. Multiple people described her similarly. Tall, slender build, probably in her 40s, with sharp features partially hidden by a scarf or the collar of her coat. No one got a clear look at her face. She seemed to time her approaches for dusk or when the alley lights were dim. One usher swore she had an Eastern European accent, but others weren't sure. We started keeping a log at the stage door, just in case, noting times and descriptions. The theater manager even called the local precinct to report a potential stalker, but without a name or any threats. They said there wasn't much they could do beyond advising us to stay vigilant. Then came that one tense night, about a month into the run. It was a Friday performance, packed house, and the energy backstage was electric. I was helping with quick changes in the wings when, right after the final bow, a cast member, Sarah, who played Linda, burst into the dressing room area, out of breath. "I think I saw her slip inside," she whispered urgently. According to Sarah, she'd been heading to the hallway that led from the stage to the prop storage when she caught a glimpse of a tall figure in a dark coat darting through the side door. It was chaos post-show. People milling about, audience members lingering in the lobby. So it wasn't impossible for someone to sneak in if they knew the layout. Security was alerted immediately. We did a full sweep, checked the dressing rooms, the catwalks, even the basement storage where old sets gathered dust. I tagged along with one of the guards, my heart pounding a little from the excitement. We found nothing. No woman, no signs of forced entry, not even a misplaced prop. The side door had been left propped open briefly for some equipment loadout, which explained how she might have gotten in. But she was gone as quickly as she'd appeared. Alex, when we told him, went pale and excused himself to his dressing room, slamming the door. The rest of us exchanged uneasy glances, but the show must go on. So we wrapped up and headed home, double-checking locks on our way out. The following week was when things escalated. Alex started missing cues in rehearsals, looking distracted and jumpy. He'd snap at minor things, like a delayed light change, which wasn't like him. Finally, during a cast meeting, he announced he was quitting the show effective immediately. No explanation, just that personal matters required his attention. The director was furious. We had to scramble to bring in an understudy, but Alex packed his things and left that day. Rumors flew. Was it the woman? Health issues? A better gig? But he wouldn't say a word, even to his closest co-stars. It wasn't until a couple of months later, after I'd finished my internship and moved on to another job, that I got the full story. I stayed in touch with a few folks from the theater, and one day, Sarah texted me a link to a news article. Turns out the woman was Alex's estranged sister, Elena. They'd grown up in a dysfunctional family back in Boston, abusive parents, the whole 9 yards, and had lost contact years ago after a nasty fallout over inheritance. Elena had been trying to track him down, not out of malice, but because their mother was dying and wanted to reconcile. She'd been too ashamed or proud to give her name at first, hoping Alex would recognize her description or come out to meet her. The slip inside incident? Probably her attempting to confront him directly, but she panicked and left when she heard footsteps. Alex, haunted by old traumas, couldn't face it. Quitting the show was his way of running again. He moved to LA shortly after, changed his number, and cut ties with most of the cast. Elena eventually connected with him through a mutual friend. And from what I heard, they patched things up enough to attend the funeral together. No dramatic chases or hidden secrets beyond that. Just family messiness. The kind that theater folks know all too well from the scripts we perform. Looking back, it was less a mystery and more a reminder that everyone's got ghosts from their past. even if they're not the supernatural kind. The Regency Theater carried on without him, and I learned a valuable lesson about boundaries in the arts world.